Well, thank you, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jenny Wood. I work for Congressmember Karen Bass, who will be joining us shortly. And I wanted to just share a bit about the Foster Youth Caucus, which is one of the co-hosting entities for today's briefing. And if we could go to the next slide, Jason. Oh. Seem to be having some technical difficulties. That's okay. Everybody has the flyer that you received when you walked in. The Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth is a growing caucus that focuses on issues related to foster youth and improving the outcomes for foster youth and their families. It is co-chaired by Representatives Karen Bass, Tom Marino, Michelle Bachman, and Jim McDermott. And this year, we are currently in the process of not only doing a series of Hill briefings, which you are participating in today, but also a nationwide listening tour, hearing from foster youth and foster youth stakeholders around the country, and taking that information back here to Congress to hopefully create policy that will improve the lives of foster youth while engaging them in the policy creation process. I'd also like to do a quick shout out to the Victims' Rights Caucus. And Andy, I know you're here somewhere. Come on up to share a little bit about that caucus.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andy. As Jenny said, I'm here on behalf of the Congressional Victims' Rights Caucus, which was founded in 2006 by my boss, Congressman Jim Costa of California, and Congressman Ted Poe of Texas. The caucus does a range of activities, including hosting briefings like this one, introducing legislation on behalf of crime victims, and a series of other actions. We're a growing caucus as well. We're right now around 75 bipartisan members, and for those of you who are here on congressional staff, we'd love to have your bosses on board as well. So if you need to reach me, my email is andy.flick@mail.house.gov. Thanks for being here.
All right, excellent. And so we're going to move into the rest of our briefing, and we'll just do a quick agenda overview, but the person that's going to do that and actually moderate the rest of this briefing is Jessie Leigh Swenson from the Human Rights Project for Girls. And it's a new organization. Jessie has a tremendous amount of experience in a variety of advocacy for children, and hopefully she'll be able to share with you a bit of that experience throughout the rest of the briefing. So Jessie, come on up.
Thank you, Jenny. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. It's really great to see such a full room. It's such an important topic and a really great panel that we have today. So we're really thrilled to see standing room only, although I feel bad for you. Again, thanks and welcome. My name is Jessie Leigh Swenson. As Jenny said, I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Human Rights Project for Girls. Rights for Girls is a national organization dedicated to framing gendered violence in the United States as a human rights issue and raising awareness of the perilous lives led by vulnerable young women and girls here in the United States. The trafficking of girls in the U.S. has reached crisis levels. The Department of Justice estimates that 293,000 American children are currently at risk annually for domestic child trafficking. The average age of entry into so-called prostitution or child prostitution is 13 in the United States, which is a really astounding number. And the risk factors for victimization of trafficking include abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, prior trauma, living in poverty, and disconnection from the education system. But a major risk factor is the child welfare system and child welfare system involvement, especially out-of-home foster care placement. The numbers paint a dire national portrait. In Alameda County, California, their trafficking response found that local trafficking victims were 55% from foster youth group homes in Alameda County. In New York State, 85% of trafficking victims statewide had prior child welfare involvement. And in Florida, the head of the Florida Trafficking Task Force estimated that 70% of Florida victims were foster youth. And that was unfortunately highlighted recently by those horrific cases of trafficking rings being run out of congregate care facilities in Jacksonville and Miami. A child's vulnerability to trafficking dramatically increases if that child has run away or is missing from care. And that risk is really high for girls. We recently learned from our coalition partner, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that of missing intake cases that NCMEC cataloged since 2004, 96.6% of those missing children were female. And this is why we're here today. The fact that so many of these children are child welfare involved presents us with both an opportunity and a challenge. We have the opportunity to form a national framework for prevention of trafficking. But we also have the challenge of providing adequate services and treatment for the deep and complex traumas suffered by domestic child trafficking victims. Rights for Girls works to highlight the intersection of domestic child trafficking and the child welfare and juvenile justice systems. We are at the helm of a national coalition of child welfare and juvenile justice leaders, some of whom are represented here in this room today. And we are ready as a coalition to claim this issue and to work at a response. We seek to dismantle the sexual violence to prison pipeline, which pipelines so many of our American girls into the juvenile justice system and into educational disconnection. Trafficking is unfortunately a very common stop and becoming more common in that pipeline in the vulnerable lives of girls. We are fortunate to be joined today by an expert panel who will share information and perspectives on the prevalence of domestic child trafficking and its overlap with the child welfare system. And our panel will also share with you some fantastic state-based responses and solutions that are promising and scalable. We hope that everyone in this room will walk away energized and informed and ready to form a congressional response to this national problem. But before I turn it over to the panel, I am very pleased to take this opportunity to introduce Representative Karen Bass. Karen Bass is really the other reason we are here today. Her leadership has been amazing on this issue. Prior to serving as the current representative for California's 33rd District, Karen Bass made history when the California Assembly elected her to be its 67th Speaker, catapulting her to becoming the first African-American woman in the country to serve in this powerful state legislative role. Bass continues to be an advocate for foster kids and is dedicated to transforming the child welfare system. In California, she carried several bills to support programs and funding to ensure foster youth have better chances for success, including legislation that uses federal funds to extend support for California's foster youth to the age of 21, which is a huge success. She recently founded and continues to co-chair the Congressional Caucus on Foster Care and has introduced several House bills to improve child welfare outcomes. One of those bills was introduced last August, H.R. 2730, titled the Strengthening the Child Welfare Response to Human Trafficking Act of 2011. And that bill seeks to help ensure that foster youth are provided with the appropriate prevention and services to stop human trafficking within this vulnerable population nationwide. Congressmember Karen Bass serves on the Budget Committee and is ranking member for the Foreign Affairs Committee for the Africa, Global Health, and Human Rights Subcommittee. She proudly represents California's 33rd District, including parts of Los Angeles, Hollywood, and Culver City. Let's welcome Representative Karen Bass.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here this afternoon and spending time with us. I wish I had the opportunity to sit through the entire panel, but you know how they move us around. But I know that I'll be in good hands with Ginny Wood, who is the staff director for the Foster Care Caucus. I want to thank you for coming today for this issue that's real critical. And one thing, you know, about Congress, with its reputation of being so partisan and everything being so hostile here, some good news is that this really is a bipartisan issue. It's a bipartisan issue and a bicameral issue, which means that there's members who are in the House as well as in the Senate who are very, very concerned about the issue of human trafficking and in particular the intersection with foster youth. And let me just share something very quickly with you, because I don't want to take away from the panel at all. But the Congressional Caucus on Adoption did its foster youth. We met with the foster youth last week who are interns here, and I'm sure many of them are in the room today. A few weeks before that, we did a shadow day with foster youth in the House of Representatives, and one young woman told me that she felt that being a foster youth really set her up to be trafficked. And the reason for that is because she said when she was a foster youth, she was moved and bounced from house to house, group home to group home, and it didn't seem as though anyone ever cared. But yet when she met her pimp, even though he treated her the way he did, and even though he beat her and everything else that happens, at least she knew he would always be there. And when she said that to me, it was really devastating. I mean, it stayed with me, and I will make it a point to continue to talk about that because it makes us raise into question some of the fundamental structures of the system. And I know in the Los Angeles area, and I hear different statistics, but the task force that focuses on this issue, Innocence Laws, in the Los Angeles County Probation Department, talk about around 60% of the girls that they find are who are trafficked are from the foster care system. And one of my goals is to eliminate the notion that you can be a prostitute and be a child. That doesn't even make sense. That's not a category, because if you're underage and you can't give permission, how can that term be put on you? It's a question of rape, and it's a question of us raising the consciousness of people to not view the young girls and guys who are involved in this. Well, one thing that was told to me is that some of the young guys who are in the foster care system, in particular connected to group homes, wind up recruiting the young girls. And so we really have to look at the whole system, and I know that's why everybody is here today. The bill that I'm doing was mentioned, and I do hope that we can work to push forward that legislation, and you know how it goes in D.C. If not this year, we will continue on next year. So let me just thank you again for your attendance, for your work on the issue, and I look forward to hearing a report from Jenny. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Representative Bass. And what she's just said about foster youth being a sort of training ground for trafficking is very true, and we've heard from several survivors the same thing. And in fact, one survivor said that another part of the major sort of preparation or the similarities was being attached to a check and being abused and cared for, and suffering that duality while being attached to a check was very much similar to her experience being trafficked by a pimp. So I think we should definitely, as Representative Bass said, keep that survivor's story with us today and throughout our work. Next, I'd like to introduce Carol Smolensky. And Carol is the executive director and one of the founders of End Child Prostitution and Child Pornography and Trafficking, or ECPAT USA. And ECPAT was very instrumental in today's briefing. We're very thankful for their work. ECPAT has been working for over 20 years protecting the rights of children and taking a leadership role to stop the commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking of children. Carol has been an instrumental team player with ECPAT to educate communities and ensuring children's fundamental rights from all forms of commercial exploitation are being protected. Thank you very much, Carol. We look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Representative Karen Bass, for your leadership. I know she's not here, but just for the record. I won't actually make many remarks. I am here to introduce a video of which we're going to play 2 small snippets. Let me just give a little bit of an introduction before I give the high sign to the tech person at the back. We developed this video to be an educational video aimed at state legislators, child welfare workers, law enforcement, and the general public. To let people know how is it that American children end up in sexual exploitation. For a long time, there was really confusion that trafficking must mean only people from other countries because they're so poor over there and we're not so poor. So we have been sort of plowing the ground to try to raise awareness that it happens right here, and that this 21-minute documentary video is about that. I will show you a snippet where Katrina Owens, who is the survivor who generously shared her story with us, tells us about what happened to her, what it was like for her. And then we'll skip ahead to the very end of the video and just show the little 1 or 2 minutes about some proposed solutions. So I'll ask Jason, I think, to just start it, and then I'll say something again.
It was actually on one of my first jobs where I met my trafficker. I was 16 going on 17, working as a hostess and learning to serve. And he was a very suave, very well put together, charming man who happened to be 30. And we began to hang out. He would take me home because I obviously didn't have a car. And that turned into gifts here and there on those rides and having conversations, which turned into sex, which then turned into a conversation of having sex with others or a return on his investment.
Victims of sexual exploitation have their minds fooled to think that this lifestyle is the right way to live, just like I believed.
The first occurrence or the introduction into the life, we were hanging out with a few of his friends, which I came to find out they were traffickers also, and hanging out with their girls that they had. And it was through them. It became more of a grooming process where, you know, this is what we do. We hang out, you know, we smoke, we drink, we eat, we have fun, and we go to work, and this is our work, and this is what we do, and, you know, you can make this kind of money. And, you know, in the midst of all of that, my trafficker is telling me how much he loves me and, you know, how important I am to him. And I had to hold him up on that, you know. And so that led to the first time. At the most, my trafficker had 5 girls of all ethnicities. They all came from broken homes in some way, some form, whether there was sexual abuse, drug abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, divorce. It came from every range, as well as financial ranges. Certain voids and certain pieces, when those pieces are missing, and there's this embodiment of, I don't even know the best phrase for it, but they fill that void. The traffickers fill that void. And they're very, very, very intelligent at keying in on what those voids are. So if you didn't have a father, I'll be that daddy. If you've never fallen in love, I will be that first love. And by filling in those blanks, they're giving these young women something they never had.
When I was 14, I started running away. While I was out, I got recruited into the life by this guy I used to hang out with. Growing up in a home where we didn't have much, it sounded like a dream come true.
Obviously, there's similarities in terms of who has been sexually exploited. We know risk factors. We know that most of them are coming from homes fraught with abuse and neglect, domestic violence in the home. They've experienced sexual abuse, oftentimes a lot of drug and alcohol usage in the home. So there's these risk factors. But again, especially with the change in media and technology, this can happen to anybody.
When children are being trafficked, the initial trafficking may not be recognized by the youth as that they're being exploited or trafficked. There's a lot of subversive attempts by the trafficker to keep the youth thinking that what is happening to them is this is normal. This is what other people do.
I didn't realize I was exploited until years after the life. It was like normal life, but opposite in day and night. Our day started at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, where you got up, you showered, you ate, and it was time to go to work. That generally started around 8 o'clock and quite often didn't end until about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning when everyone else is going to work. The conversation between the trafficker and the youth is, allow me to hold on to your money so that it'll be safe. But at the end of the night, when it's all said and done, there's no transfer of that money back to you. There's so much manipulation involved. One minute you're beating me, but the next minute you're telling me how much you love me. The first time that I was arrested in Atlanta, I was arrested by an undercover police officer. I was 17, so I was sent to pretrial. I was sent to the adult facility and released hours earlier. He paid the fine, and I was back at work the next night.
If we realize that a young woman has been involved in sexual exploitation and then we charge her with prostitution and lock her up without therapeutic services, all we are doing is confirming what the perpetrator has been telling her all along, that you're worthless, you're good for nothing, and that absolutely is not what we should be doing as a system of care.
I do receive the question of, why don't you just leave often? The easiest thing that I can relate to that is a domestic violence relationship between a husband and a wife, or a girlfriend and a boyfriend. It's a trauma bond, and it's an emotional bond. It's bonds on levels that I have yet to understand. And you do try to leave. And when you're physically harmed and your life is in danger, you sometimes bargain with yourself. Do I want to be safe? Or do I really want to take that chance?
Drugs took over and healed any emotions I was feeling from going out on those dangerous streets, to having sex with old men for money that would go to a man, a pimp, who would beat me and threaten to kill me if I would ever leave or snitch on him.
I was afraid to leave because he knew where my family lived. He was aware where my friends live. He was aware of the high schools that I went to. He knew so much about me that I didn't want this part of my life to be exposed.
It's really difficult for the youth that we work with to escape their traffickers and exploiters for a few reasons. Who will care for them, or who will support them because they've been through so much. The other thing is, how do I fit back in? I can't go to high school. I haven't been to high school in 3 years or since middle school, and they don't understand what I've been through. I can't fit in. So they really feel isolated and a lot of shame around what has happened to them.
When I began to attempt to leave again and again, he and I moved to New York. And that is how I ended up in the city, and I would work there. My family was so pushed away and so far away, I had no one to turn to. And things just kind of went from bad to worse at that point. I was arrested several times in New York City by undercover police officers, and on other occasions where they would pick up girls and charge them with loitering. And I had the option to either go to Rikers Island or...
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Jason. I wanted to use that snippet. That actually shows you about half of the 21-minute video, maybe a little less than that, and then skip a little bit to the end. While Jason cues that up, let me just talk about Katrina, of course, being not a typical survivor victim of sexual exploitation. Of course, we're focusing on one girl here. Of course, boys are often sexually exploited and trafficked as well. I'm using this moment to highlight that fact, even though we're using the voice of this one young woman. As you can see, if Katrina was vulnerable to sexual exploitation, children in the foster care system are certainly vulnerable. Any child who doesn't have a caring, attentive adult helping them through the really difficult teen years, I always choke up at that part, is vulnerable. And so kids in the foster care system, of course, are the ones that we really have to be putting a huge focus on, and which HR, of course, HR 2730 will certainly do. Let me just ask Jason to play those last 2 minutes again from the
child
from the stage.
Or our relative, or the child of a neighbor that we knew and cared about, would we do anything but be completely urgent in trying to stop this exploitation?
These organizations have such an effect on commercial sexually exploited children's lives in a way that there's no level of reimbursement that could be made. You know, and that's why I do what I do now. And it's quite rewarding. It's quite rewarding. It's also healing. It's healing. And it helps me to, even with dealing with the families and the children, to be a better mother to mine, as well as certain things that I see within myself through the other parents as well as through the children. So it's just as rewarding for me as it is for them. So I think it's a great trade-off.
We have many experts on the panel, so I won't take any more time. Let me just say that the video is available for anybody who wants a copy of it for free. New York City's Agency for Children's Services is now incorporating it in training on their new sex trafficking policy. The New Jersey Child Welfare Institute is using it in training, and we've just actually reached out to all the other states' child protective service agencies. So if there's anybody here representing any of those agencies, we'll be very happy to give you a free copy to use. And thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much, Carol. And I encourage you all to watch the movie. It's a fantastic and award-winning, right, yes, documentary. Yes. So it's really fantastic. And I do want to highlight just a couple of things that Katrina said. She said, you know, that all of the girls in her stable, as the pimp calls it, came from broken homes. And that when those pieces are missing, is what she said, a girl becomes much more vulnerable. And so, you know, if you can imagine how many pieces are missing for a foster youth who has moved to multiple placements, who has zero permanency, who has zero normalness in their life. I mean, this is the vulnerable youth that we're looking at. And next up, I'm really pleased to introduce Tina Front. Tina is the executive director and founder of Courtney's House, an organization committed to providing a safe environment and essential services for both girls and boys who are survivors of sex trafficking. Herself a survivor, Tina realized the importance of offering victims essential services to help them heal and succeed. Tina is deeply committed to helping others living through experiences similar to her own, and has been a leading figure in the crusade to help educate lawmakers and communities about exploited children. We are honored to have you here. Thank you, Tina.
Well, thank you all for coming out. If you ever heard me speak, you will know I so desperately want to not be behind a podium, come talk to you all, put you on a circle, and discuss sex trafficking. But since my time is limited, my name is... And I like that, but we'll do this. We'll do this. My name is Tina Front, and I'm the founder of Courtney's House, based in Washington, D.C., which provides services for domestic minor sex trafficking youth, both male and female. And as I discuss this today, I really want you to know that we're not really talking about the boys and the male, an underserved population that's not being served for services. So when we talk about children here today, they're also included as well. With that said, I'm also a survivor of child sex trafficking. I was placed in a foster care system at 3 years old. My earliest memory of child sexual abuse happened while in foster care. The abuse continued in many foster homes, around 10 different homes. While in the foster care system, the abuse included being sold to other people for sexual purposes. I was not alone in experiencing this abuse. It became the norm for many other foster children, both male and female. Although I reported this numerous times to various social workers, it became very clear no one believed me. This set the tone for many years. Luckily, at 12 years old, I was adopted to a loving family. However, I suffered years of abuse beforehand and had to deal with the trauma. I was 13 years old when I fell in love for the first time. He turned out to be a pimp. I was raped, manipulated, sold for sex, and beaten on a regular basis. My past experience of being abused and sold and not having specialized counseling kept me from thinking anyone truly cared about me. Courtney's House provides street outreach, research, case management, support group, specialized sex trafficking assessments, national for survivor, by survivor hotline, parent support groups, all specializing in trauma-informed services to both boys and girls of sex trafficking. Courtney's House serves U.S. citizens who are survivors of sex trafficking ages 12 to 18 and emergency case management for ages 19 to 21 for up to 30 days in all of D.C., Northern Virginia, and Maryland to Baltimore. Being the only survivor of sex trafficking-led organization in D.C. area, I committed to developing and providing the specialized services that I did not receive when I was in and out of the foster care system. After providing services to over 500 survivors of sex trafficking, I realized that what happened to me many years ago continued to happen. What is more compelling is that it's happening at a faster rate. And before, simply because, now it's just simply because people don't understand the right questions to ask to get the right answer. I created a specialized sex trafficking assessment that breaks down individual sex trafficking schemas. So not just pimp control, but gang control, family, and boys. The questions are specific to the terminology and rules that are associated in each sex trafficking situation. And yes, there are rules to this. Upon implementing these assessments since Courtney's House started in 2008, we have realized that 100% of our boys are or were involved in the foster care system. 33% of our girls were involved in the foster care system. The majority of the referrals for boys do not come directly from the foster care system. The initial contact is on the street during our street outreach from 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. Additionally, referrals are from the juvenile detention facilities, and only a handful of direct referrals come from the foster care system, and only for our girls. For the girls, it is even a mixture of referrals coming from the foster care, juvenile detention, and court systems. Currently, 43% of our girls are referred by their parents or guardians. From the data of our sex trafficking assessments at Courtney's House, 100% of our girls who were in the foster care were being sexually abused inside the foster care system. In addition, the national statistics on sex trafficking are correct about the average age of entry into forced prostitution for girls being 12 to 14. For the boys, we see 98% enter the foster care system between the ages of 6 and 10 years old. And were being sex trafficked by their family members, which is how they entered the foster care system. However, the sexual abuse was labeled as child sexual abuse and not sex trafficking. All of our boys who came through the foster care system were additionally trafficked between the ages of 12 and 14. What this means to us is there are many more boys and girls in the foster care system who are simply not being asked the right questions. To to receive any type of specialized services. We at Courtney's House understand the demand on the social workers and the foster care systems. Too many cases, and sex trafficking is just one component. It is our recommendation to pick about 4 core states, train all of the foster care system staff from the top to the bottom on human trafficking, including all forms of sex trafficking, pimp control, gang control, family control, and boys transgender. The training will also include implementing sex trafficking assessments. The assessments will focus on the 4 forms of sex trafficking. Once a social worker conducts the assessments, becoming aware that sex trafficking is involved, the worker will then work with specialized nonprofit to help out with the caseload. With that said, they will also work with the police, so we can go after the traffickers and the buyers who have sex with our children on a daily basis. The data from the assessments will be recorded, providing accurate numbers of children who are being sex trafficked while they're in the foster care system. These assessments and specialized care, if this was in place when I was in a foster care system, then I know that I would have been able to get the help that I desperately needed and deserved. I think the question we really need to ask, now that we know what the problem is and ways we can fix the problem, is what are we actually going to do about it? And how fast will we create a resolution so the very system that is supposed to protect our foster youth from further abuse actually does just that, and children can stop running away from a system that is supposed to help them? With that said, I do want to thank everyone for their opportunity to share my experiences, but I do want you to remember something. That this is not something that I heard about. This is not something that I read on TV. This is something that happened to me on a daily basis. And now that you see me standing here before you and say, well, hey, without services, she's still here and she provided services. It took me 10 years to get to this place, and only since 2005 was speaking out about my story. It's different layers that have ways more to do with the story. It's about services that we do need. And trauma just doesn't happen in a year and you're over trauma. You still on a daily basis work to deal with all of this that a system is supposed to pay for and never did. I really implore you all today to go back and please push HR 2730 because we need this passed and we needed to pass yesterday. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tina. Your story is just so powerful, and I really want to give you our heartfelt thanks for sharing that with us. And it's so important to have Tina today, and we're very happy. And so I just wanted to point out a couple of things that Tina's program accentuates and Tina's story accentuates, which is that these kids are coming out of the foster care system, but they're being routed into JJ, into the juvenile justice system, where they receive 0 therapeutic services. They're punished for being victims. And that is what we're seeing, and that's what Courtney's House is trying to fix. And that's a problem. It's a problem within the child welfare system. It's a lack of cooperation with law enforcement. It's a lack of training. It's a lack of services. So now we get to have the bright side of all this by listening to Connecticut's story of how they're trying to fix that. So now I'm very pleased to introduce Tammy Sneed, who is the Director of Girls Services for DCF in Connecticut and for the Connecticut Academy for Family and Workforce Knowledge. Tammy is the director of this Girls Services in DCF, and she is committed, along with DCF, to protect children and to bring children who are abused into proper support systems and community-based help systems. Tammy has been dedicated to protecting and training through this program, and we are really, really happy to have her here today to talk about Connecticut's amazing work. Thank you, Tammy.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I actually have the easiest part of the afternoon. After watching this video and listening to Tina, I think what I have to share just makes a whole lot of sense. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Connecticut's system and how we have developed a response to domestic minor sex trafficking. And I will tell you, thus far, we have not added any new dollars to serve this population. We truly believe it's our responsibility. So I just want to put that out there right from the beginning. In Connecticut, we've had, over the last several years since we started tracking this, we've had close to 100 victims. This year, we've had 10 new identified victims. Only one of those are international. So that really goes to show you that this is in our backyard. I've been working with girls for almost 20 years. This is not new. It's about having a new lens to look at these young people. It's about paying attention to what's really going on and addressing the situation across the United States, not just in Connecticut. Our young people that I think Tina spoke very eloquently about, these young people have very serious histories of abuse and neglect, starting at very young ages. The victims that we've identified so far, we've reviewed every single case. They all come through our human trafficking team. Of the cases we reviewed, again, 100% of them, 100% of them have a history of prior sexual abuse, prior to being sexually exploited, starting at as young as age 2. This could be any young person that you come into contact on a daily basis. We do have girls that come from a normal family, girls you wouldn't expect to be engaging in this. But we also have young people that are particularly vulnerable. Children, females particularly, the vast majority of our young people identified have been females. I will clearly tell you, though, I think that's because we are not doing a good job of identifying males for a number of reasons. We currently have a team right now looking at the dynamics of male victims and how to do better assessments. Black female children, also very high numbers in Connecticut. We have cases where it's alarming to have learned that we've identified a Caucasian female victim, and my question is, how often were there black female victims on that same street corner that we didn't respond to? Our numbers are very, very high. Direct correlations to our system, as Tina shared today, chronic AWOL, truancy, abuse and neglect, significant family abuse histories. Trafficker can be anybody, and I think I'm excited to hear about Tina's assessments and really looking at all the aspects of assessing these young people. We've had situations of guerrilla pimping where it was very, very violent. We've had gang-related pimping. We've had families. We've had moms and dads pimping their young people for money. So we've seen everything in Connecticut. We have 2 public acts in Connecticut that have supported our efforts. I think we've gone above and beyond what these acts require. We want to do more. The 2 acts, one, it no longer permits us to arrest a young person under the age of 16 for prostitution. And it also has a new public act that requires law enforcement to call us with any potential victims. Cases come to us in a variety of different ways, but I will tell you what I tell police officers. They're not going to walk up to you and say, I'm a victim of domestic minor sex trafficking. They're probably going to be very rude. They're not going to want to talk to you. They're not going to want your help initially for all the reasons Tina shared with you today. We have a policy at DCF. We're currently revising it to strengthen it, but we've had this policy in place for almost 4 years, and it really states that we have a commitment to this population. Our framework, to get us started a few years ago, we developed a framework, and we continue to modify this on a probably every 6-month basis. Identification and response really focuses on who are these young people? Our care line has a set of indicators, so when any call goes into our care line, if there's any of those words that indicates that there's a possibility, that case is referred to our human anti-trafficking response team so we can take a look. Awareness and education, we're doing significant efforts across the state in training. We are training public defenders, judges, police officers, schools, all of our social workers in our child welfare system have been trained, foster families, and community members. Restore and recovery, we're doing a number of exciting opportunities. I will point out that the My Life, My Choice curriculum is rolled out now in all our girls' programs. It's a 10-week curriculum for girls. And we have found that usually halfway through this curriculum, girls will start to identify. They'll say, hey, that's me, I'm a victim. We have a new curriculum for boys called Man Up, very new. It is not a curriculum specific to domestic minor sex trafficking, but it's about boys, healthy relationships, women, and it gets to this issue, and we're seeing some really remarkable results. This is our care line. Again, this is, we'd ask officers, EMS, teachers, anybody that just suspects, they don't have to prove it, call our department. Our heart team will respond. We'll reach out to any young person. If he or she is not ready at that time, we'll give him or her that opportunity to call us back. We'll reach out to him or her again. We'll provide services. We will go to court with them. We'll do whatever we can to support them. Again, they're not running to us for help. Sometimes they don't want it at that point, but the key is to let them know that we're there.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And just a couple of follow-ups. I do want to point out that Connecticut really, truly is an anomaly in its treatment of the care line and in its receiving those phone calls and investigating trafficking reports. We've heard nationwide that oftentimes mandatory reporters will call a state's DCF hotline to report a suspected case of trafficking and will be referred to law enforcement by that state's care line, and that's something that we would love to see a culture change on nationally, and Karen Bass's bill does a lot of work in really rolling that out. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that Connecticut is also by far the model statewide program for training. It's completely comprehensive training, not only for social workers, it's also for law enforcement, for community members, for hospital workers, for anybody who might have contact with a child, basically. And she's developed some really amazing curricula that are fantastic, including the Man Up training, which she mentioned, which is for boys, and to have boys find more responsibility in their manhood and to treat women with respect. So that's, thank you so much, Tammy. It was a really fantastic presentation. And next I want to introduce Stephanie Richard. She is the Policy and Legal Services Director for the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, or CAST, which is a nonprofit organization who actively works to mobilize communities and to identify and advocate against trafficking. They are dedicated to offering victims direct services to help them completely heal and to move into a thriving and better lives. All right, thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today about this really important issue. CAST provides comprehensive services to survivors of modern-day slavery in the Los Angeles area. We were founded in 1998, and we're one of the oldest, long-standing service providers in the country, exclusively dedicated to assisting this population. We serve men, women, and children with comprehensive services that include shelter, case management, and legal services. When we're looking at the issue of child trafficking, I really do want to highlight that it's not just about child sex trafficking, which is definitely where we're seeing the majority of cases, but we've also identified many child labor trafficking cases, both U.S. citizen and foreign national. Cases of child labor trafficking that we've seen that you rarely hear about are U.S. citizens who are runaways, who are recruited from an au pair website and then travel to a different state to become a nanny, who are roofied and then raped and forced to work in someone's home. We have 4 national survivors who are brought as early as 7 to 9 years old, who are forced to work in people's homes, are actually bringing children to school every day, and for 7 or 8 or 9 years, no one is identifying why this child, him or herself, is not going to school. We've also seen cases of forced begging, individuals who are forced to sell drugs, and then when the police come and find them, they're the ones left with a bag of drugs because all the traffickers ran away. Kids who are forced to work in magazine crews, and kids who are forced to work in agriculture. So we want to highlight that child trafficking is a horrible crime that touches many different types of victims, and it's really where we're looking for it. And so child sex trafficking, we have to change the whole culture of how we're approaching our children who are being prostituted, but we also have to change our whole culture of where we're looking for this type of victim as well. So at CAST, we're really fortunate that we received one of the first Office of Victims of Crime Specialized Legal Services grant, and so right now we're actually developing, we think, one of the first specialized legal services programs for U.S. citizen survivors of trafficking. Now, we've chosen, because it's not a large grant, to focus on U.S. citizen sex trafficked minors, and through this outreach and through this program, we are currently working with the STAR court, the Succeeding Through Achievement and Resilience court, and this is probation, and it's basically a prostitution diversion program. So if a child is identified as a victim, they are arrested and put into a court proceeding and then receive specialized services. If they make it through the 18-month mandated court services, they then have the charges dismissed against them. We are also currently working with the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office to develop a comprehensive county-wide diversion program for youth charged with prostitution. Now, we really support and commend the issues of the child delinquency programs and probation, but we also think that this is not the model that we want to see promulgated. What we want is for our child welfare services to be stepping up, like what we see in Connecticut, and when someone's identified as a victim, the response not being we should arrest them to protect them. So this is really a whole cultural shift that we need, not just in California, but I think across the United States, to really see this population as a victim in need of services, but then also thinking where should they be getting those services. So we have had difficulties in California in having child welfare engage. Although, as you've heard from all the different panel members, a lot of the children that are being identified as trafficked have already had multiple contacts with the child welfare system, and I can tell you from CAST's personal experience that is the case. You heard that 60% of the kids in Los Angeles who were identified as working in prostitution came from child welfare, and I can tell you that when I've given training to child welfare workers, after the training I've asked them to raise their hand if they've ever had this type of child, and 100% always do. So we know that targeting the child welfare system is a key area where we can have real results. There are, though, consistent barriers in getting child welfare engaged, at least from our experience in California, and that's been a lot of times because these kids have been the jurisdiction of the juvenile delinquency, and even when there is jural jurisdiction, so you have dependency and juvenile delinquency, that there's a decision made that these kids always go to juvenile delinquency. We need our child welfare officers and programs to be stepping up and saying, no, these children need to be in our systems and our services. But this is hard when they don't have the model programs or are not identifying these kids. We're unfortunate that we don't have Tammy's leadership everywhere. We also have to remember, as we're looking at the model that we're developing, that there is always going to be a role for juvenile delinquency in when addressing the issue of child trafficking. But what we don't want is that for that to be the starting point, right? What we're seeing with these model diversion programs are that it's very difficult to get children engaged in them. One, done, because getting arrested and then having to go to court to get services isn't the best way to get someone to trust you. And we find that it is exactly what the trafficker or pimp told them would happen. They're going to get arrested, and they're going to lock you down, and they're going to take your life away. Okay? Then what you also see is when kids run away from those programs, which they do, and then they go back to the life, but then want to re-engage back into services because they decide that and make that choice from themselves, because there's a warrant out for their arrest, because of their contact with the child diversion programs, it's harder for them to engage in services. So again, there are multiple reasons we really need to ask child welfare to step up. And clearly some changes need to be made at the state level for child welfare to be more involved. We know that in most states, prostitution is criminalized no matter what your age. If you're a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, or 12-year-old who's been prostituted, you can be arrested and convicted of that crime, and we clearly see that happening. So we need to absolutely decriminalize kids in our system. If they can't consent to sex, how do they consent to commercial sex and be criminalized because of it? We also need to do things to change who has jurisdiction over these kids and make clear in our child welfare laws that children who are trafficked fall under the dependency court, because a lot of times the trafficker isn't the guardian or the parent, and so we need to make clear that these are especially vulnerable kids that need child protective services. And finally, though, there is a lot that the federal government can do to kind of help create this change that we need to see at the states and help this come along more quickly. So under federal law, we're very lucky that it's clear that all children engaging in prostitution induced to perform a commercial sex act are sex trafficking under our definition. So our law is clear about that these kids are victims. For our labor trafficked kids, you do have to show force, fraud, or coercion. But again, if we're looking for that, we're going to be able to identify that. And so, we stand here, all of us on the panel today, really asking you to co-sponsor HR 2730. This comes from our on-the-ground experience in knowing that child welfare agencies really need to step up. And what HR 2730 does, just so you have a short description of it, is first, it makes a change to the Social Security Administration Act that basically requires, if you're receiving federal funds for your child welfare program, to report on about 10 different areas, so it asks you to report on one more. So on what you're doing to work on child trafficking issues. Now you can say you're doing nothing, but what we're hoping is that just having to report on it will require people to start a dialogue that we saw in Connecticut. And what we saw from Tammy's experience was that it doesn't cost a lot because most of these kids are already in the system, and these programs are already conducting a lot of training, so a lot of it's what they're already doing, and they really do have the resources to protect these kids. The second thing that this bill does is say, well, we as the federal government have information that we can use that we've collected from the states and best practices, and create toolkits so that states, when they're looking at developing their child welfare response, really have a toolkit to start from and aren't working in silos, which is what we've seen in other states. So, I stand here today to really urge, and from my on-the-ground experience working with trafficking survivors for 8 years and serving a caseload of over 120 victims a year, in saying that this is the type of legislation that can really make an impact and change not just the culture, but the whole future of these kids. Thank you.
And if you could introduce yourself as well.
Hi, my name is Danielle Khalil. I'm from Catholic Charities USA. Something I've come across a lot in my work is people who learn about the issue of trafficking and are really moved by it, but feel kind of helpless in their ability to do anything. So I was wondering if you could speak to that and each give suggestions as to what people in that kind of situation can do to fight against trafficking.
I will tell you, one of the biggest issues, I think, is educating our young people. So Connecticut was really focused on our training efforts and training police and training up providers and how to respond to victims. But the issue of trafficking, understanding what a victim looks like, understanding it's real in the United States, real in your state that you're coming from, I think is huge, and I know there's lots of media mechanisms out there, and I'm not really skilled at all of that, but the more we can get what this is out there to the young people, I think that's where we need to go.
Luckily, I'm loud. There are a few things. I'm grassroots, so I'm going to tell you there are a few things that you can do here in the area since Courtney's House is based here. One, we would love your funding to help our wonderful programs, but more importantly, we would love you and your time. We have a mentorship program. We do training on DMST so you can understand all the variables of sex trafficking as well. Internships, working directly with, but I say a training so you can actually understand each paradigm and what actually goes on the ground as well. So encourage you all to check our website out, and we want you as a volunteer intern. Come on down.
And just to add, is this on? Because I don't think I'm as loud as okay, I'm going to try. So just to add, there is a lot the public can do. 1/3 of our cases are currently referred by what we call Good Samaritans. So just by understanding what human trafficking is and knowing your community and know what's weird about it can really help, get someone out of a difficult situation. What you shouldn't do, though, is rescue people yourself. This is the job of law enforcement or trained providers. We do get a lot of requests from people with really good intentions who can do a lot of harm. So I like to highlight that and every time I speak. Also, I want to let you know about a new California law, SB 657, that looks at transparency in your supply chain so consumers can really vote with their feet and learn about what companies they're buying from and what they're doing to end modern-day slavery in their supply chain. Carol and ECPAT have this great code of conduct. I'll highlight that, where you can see the hotels and airlines that are signed on to end child exploitation and utilize those services as well. And then finally, at CAS, we do have lots of volunteer opportunities, so if any of you are in the Los Angeles area, please reach out to us. But I also know that if you're a lawyer, and I know lots of people in DC are, there's great pro bono opportunities for lawyers who directly represent trafficking victims. At CAS, we provide 8-hour MCL MCLE credit for attorneys who agree to take one pro bono.
I also have something to say, because I was waiting for somebody to say Catholic Charities is nationwide. Get your constituents to support 2730 and to write to their congressman to ask him or her to co-sponsor.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Reed Mackey, Child Labor Coalition. It was a great presentation. It was heartbreaking to hear Tina talk about reporting sex abuse in the foster care system and having nobody believe her. Has that situation changed at all in the foster care system in different states? Have they imposed mandatory investigation rules if a child complains about sex abuse?
I'm just going to quickly just say, with our current client population, they have all reported it. No one believed them. So currently in the system in this area.
We've seen the same in our survivors that we've worked with, that especially if the foster family is of sort of high esteem in the community, the abuse in the foster home is very silenced.
And I was going to say, all of our social workers are mandatory reporters, and we always call DCFS, and we never get a response.
And that's one of the reasons why we're advocating for better integration of law enforcement and child protective services and a better multidisciplinary response at the state and local level, and a protocol and understanding between both systems so that if law enforcement does respond to a trafficking situation, they engage child protective services. And Rights for Girls actually has a sample law enforcement protocol on our website, on our resources page, if you guys want to look that up. And it's something that could be applied at the local level.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Asia Grace. I'm a case manager and survivor advocate for Fair Girls based in Washington, D.C. I just had a question about, like, in Connecticut, for example. I know that in D.C. we teach in the schools a curriculum with the high school students. I was wondering, do you all have a similar program? And I also was curious because I didn't hear anyone on the panel mention that Polaris also has a national hotline that refers to different states. I was just a little curious about those two things.
Sure, and I know we're connected with Polaris, so if a call goes there, we actually get it through our care line. Tell Your Friends curriculum is the curriculum that our schools are using, and Love 146 is doing a lot of trainings throughout Connecticut. They've been wonderful. So that's typically the curriculum that they're using in the schools. There's a lot of interest, so I'm expecting it to increase in the near future.
Okay, I was just curious.
I actually help write Tell a Friends programs, so yeah. It's all good.
Yes, my name is Ethel Talley, and I am a former foster care youth who aged out of the foster care homeless with a young child. And I think the young man that came to the mic earlier, we want to protect the young people from the outside, but yes, we do need to really address the abuse from foster care within, because it is still happening. I just wrote a book called The Heart of a Silent Cry. That's my story, but the first 50 pages deal with foster care issues. When I was in foster care, one of the foster mother's boyfriend was living in the home, and he was having sex with the girls. And then he was taking me to the hotel having sex with me. I told the social worker, she said it was nothing that she could do because I chose to sleep with him, but yet I'm a minor. Or the foster mother's friend who took me out in the woods and told me I needed to have sex with him or he would lead me out into the woods. So that is one of the things I need you guys to really address when we keep saying we want to bring child protectors in, services involved in stuff, but then we need to deal with that, protecting our kids from the foster care system that we put them into. There was an article with a man who sold his foster care daughter into prostitution, and 3 other girls, and one was registered with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So we have foster parents who are pimping out their children, so that really does need to be addressed. And I wanted to ask Stephanie, are you guys familiar with the Sarah Kutchin case in California?
Yes.
And you're from California.
I know. Yes, I am. And we.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Sarah just made me a beautiful photo album. I'm trying to not cry. And she sent me a picture. She's a child sex trafficking victim in California who was, she's done 18 years in prison. She's 34 years old, and we've been fighting for her, trying to get her, with time served. She was in foster care system, placed 5 times in 5 months. So, and groomed for prostitution at 11 years old and put out on the street at 13. So I've been writing her for 3 years. We've been doing postcard campaigns on Facebook and writing the governor and all of that. So we're really praying that, they would really let this young lady go.
And I just wanted to say that Cass has signed on to a lot of those positions. And we had a similar case of Maria Suarez, who had been in prison for 20 years for a crime she didn't commit. She'd been sex trafficked, and the person who killed her pimp had given her this mallet that they killed it with, and she was the one. And we unsuccessfully did not get the governor to sign the release, so she served all of her time. So it just shows that even though there was a written confession by the person who actually did it, so it just shows the system that we're up against, and that we need all of these voices in this room to be more powerful.
You mentioned something. You said when the youth are in the system and when they get out of the system. And so I do want you to understand, when someone is discharged from the system, there are rights that you're supposed to receive. However, you do not receive those. We have our kids get a letter and then they become homeless. So I would like to say special thank you to Blessed Haven, who's here today, Danielle Jennings' organization, actually focused on children transitioning out of the foster care system, because our kids become homeless and we go to her for helping find housing for our kids who immediately are homeless and let out of the system, wasn't receiving services anyway in the system, and now they're homeless out. So let's not forget about that transitioning out of the system youth as well.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Zimmelman, congressional intern. Just
pretty new to the sex trafficking interest and topic, learning a little bit more about it since I've been out here in D.C. Wondering in terms of legislation, has there been past legislation trying to go through Congress, or is the one presented currently really the only one that's kind of, in the process of going, or are there multiple, and I guess try and fails or successes in the past?
Sure. And Carol, do you want to handle that?
Sure. You're asking comprehensively about how much federal legislation there is around this issue. Is that what you're saying? Well, the main bill is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which of course was passed in 2001, and which of course we're so grateful for because it did identify, as one of the speakers here said, it did finally define anybody under 18 induced to perform a commercial sex act as a human trafficking victim. Huge step forward because, of course, unfortunately at the state level, they can still be prosecuted as criminals. So other than, and the reauthorization of the TVPA is stalled at this stage. So that's a really important thing for people, for it to be on people's radar. So there's this bill, and then there is the Supply Chains Transparency Bill, about which there will be 2 briefings tomorrow, so somebody else can give the details about that. Those are the ones that come to mind for me. Stephanie, was there something else you were going to mention?
No, I think that kind of summarizes the pending legislation. There is a bill by Representative Carter that deals with data collection in the criminal justice system that's been pending for a while as well. It's like a one-line bill, and it just adds human trafficking to the list of crimes that you have to report on to receive money from the federal government.
And there is also the DMST bill, or Domestic Minor Sex Trafficking Bill, which has been introduced a couple of times. Currently, it's possibly being reintroduced by Representative Maloney on the House side. And then I do also want to mention the fact that the president put $5 million in the LHHS budget this year, in his president's budget, under child welfare research, training, and demonstration grants. This is exactly what we're talking about today. That $5 million would go directly to research, training, and services for the victims that we are discussing who are involved in the child welfare system. And the Senate LHHS committee put it in their bill with really fantastic report language. So we're hoping that that gets preserved in the House side. So if there's any appropriate staffers in here, you can talk to me afterwards. But the TVPA is the major piece of legislation.
Hi, Megan Harrington. I work for Senator Portman. I'm from Ohio. He represents Ohio, and in Toledo we have, a few years ago, we were the 4th highest for the sex trafficking of minors. So it's a big issue for our state. Fortunately, earlier this year, our governor did sign into law legislation that would not criminalize solicitation and prostitution, which was a positive. But we still hear all the time with housing concerns, specifically when you're looking at the lack of group houses that are available for minors and the ones that are really adequately trained to deal with the rehabilitation, deal with potential substance abuse issues coming out of that, and really help them to get on the right path and towards a better future. And I wanted to try to get some feedback on if Connecticut has faced those problems, if there have been best practices learned from that and from any other of the members of the panel.
Sure. Connecticut took the approach, our numbers are large to us, any 1 over 1 is too many, but it wasn't enough to create entire programs for this population. And what was pointed out today is we know these young people, the vast majority of them. So what we did is we went out and we trained all our providers. So that was the approach we took. So we consult with providers when there's cases. All of them have been trained. Again, we're training the community. So and we do have some specialized services. So we have emergency beds for this population. So if a girl comes to us in the middle of the night and she needs a safe place to stay, we have beds that are designated just for this population, so we can respond immediately. We now have new credentials for mentoring. We have a specialized foster care program for this population. That's very new. Actually, we're hoping to have some of the first families starting this fall. Really looking at a relapse prevention model and families that are really ready to commit to these young people no matter what, because we know what these young people have been through, and they're going to need a whole lot from us. So we took it more of, what do we have in the state? We don't have new dollars. We don't have a 500 to 1,000 kids that we're trying to address at any given point. So what do we do to fix our system? Have this lens to look at trafficking, have this lens to look at trauma, which a lot of folks are talking about today, so we can start doing the right thing for these young people.
Let me just say something. There is this crisis around shelter beds for sexually exploited children that's been, can it be a crisis if it has gone on for years and years? Shelters are popping up here and there, shall we say, around the country with different models, different populations, and I think that we as people who are advocates don't really have a handle on it yet. I just want to do a shout out to Shared Hope International, which is sponsoring a colloquium specifically about shelter services taking place at the end of November. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and it is, I will just say that, Rights for Girls is also advocating very strongly for a standard of care among these shelters, because a response to a crisis is great and it is much needed, and we need shelters everywhere, but we need them to be comprehensive, trauma-informed, gender responsive for both boys and girls, and ready to really treat and help those youths heal and move on to a thriving life and transition out. And not just put them back on the streets unprepared for the rest of their lives. And so, it's very important, and I'm glad you asked that question.
I quickly had two things to say that's going to take 2 seconds. One would be there are no specialized housing for boys, and so we see it as a desperate need and can't refer anyone anywhere. There's a couple little beds in Washington and at youth care, but that's it, and that's all. 2, what do you place the kids after they come out the home? They're not going to live there forever. So we need also adequate services like Courtney's house as well that does drop-in center. Not every child needs housing, but every child needs services.
And then I finally just want to give a shout out to Ohio. So 3 Ohio representatives have signed on to HR 2730, which is great. And if you want a really good report done by a state attorney general's office, I've kind of reviewed them all, and I think Ohio's might be the best.
So this is going to be our last 2 questions. I hope they're quick, and then we'll do a wrap up.
Hi, my name is Corinne Anderson. I'm from Congressman Reichert's office. And I know in Washington State they're concerned about the use of the internet in human trafficking. Could you just comment briefly on kind of the scope of how much overlap there is in using internet sites for this issue?
In Connecticut, it's very high. We very seldom see the street prostitution at this point. It's mostly conducted via internet. That's why I was talking to some of the young people. We need to do some things to educate young people in a positive way. That's where most of our recruiting in regards to pimps is occurring in Connecticut.
Definitely. Courtney's House has a research team. I'll do a shout out really quickly to Fair Girls and their back pages ads. And I will also say we've been looking for girls. No one looks for boys on the internet. So it's great that we're trying to shut down each website one at a time. It's not going to work out that way. The ones that we see that are not advertised, like Adult Finder and others, are explicit, just child porn, just outright. Even on Craigslist that we said we shut down, if you go on there, you can see boys being sold, and they're nude. So I think what we need to understand is this model was always a model. It used to be in magazines, and then it moved to the internet. Don't think, though, that just because they're on the internet, they're not outside. They're working all the time everywhere. Internet plays a big pitch. So does Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, My Yearbook, really important to know. And so we're going to gear towards sites that gear towards children. So yes, definitely.
But the big player in all of this is Backpage, of course. And, we did shut down Craigslist Adult Services, but unfortunately Backpage stepped in. But, a lot of organizations like Fair Girls, wonderful work.
There's actually they have right here.
Oh, that's great. We have Fair Girls in the room.
But Craigslist isn't shut down.
Yeah, and so So, Backpage really has taken over. They've made over $26 million on their adult services section, which is largely minor listings. And Polaris and NCMEC have done some reviews of those ads, and it's really astounding. And Backpage is currently trying to hide behind the First Amendment. The First Amendment does not protect child sexualization.
And we should give a shout out to a second BAS bill, which I think we forgot to mention, which deals with technology and human trafficking and creates a task force on this issue. Can you remind me of the bill number?
2801.
2801.
Of the E-Safety Task Force, or the E-Safety Act. Some fancy acronym that we use around here on Capitol Hill.
Hi. Last question. My name is Jill Reyes. I'm from California. I'm working with American Bar Association Center and the Children in the Law Commission, Youth at Risk. Big name. Anyways, this is just a clarification question. I think from Ms. Needs, your slide, you had data on the number of females that were intake, I guess, what you collected. I'm just wondering, is that biologically based or is that self-identifying? I'm curious because there's a small population of transgender youth that I feel are overshadowed, not enough data is collected on that. So I just want to, and the rest of the panelists, is there a movement towards collecting data on this population, having the youth identify themselves, whether they're female or male? Thank you.
That's my population.
Sure. Boys and transgender youth are the areas that I don't think we're doing a good job of identifying. Of the youth identified, one of those youth was transgender, so it wasn't identified biologically.
That's my population. I mentioned that, the boy transgender assessments as well. And so that's my population. We work with 88% of all of our, both girls and boys, identify as LGBTQ.
And I'm actually a big fan of your house. I've actually done a lot of research on Courtney's house.
Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, and the CAP report that recently came out on runaway and homeless youth exposed that around 45% of runaway and homeless youth identify as LGBT. So this is an extremely vulnerable population. Actually, what Tammy's program came out of is Connecticut turned its attention to its runaway and homeless youth population and the fact that so many foster youth were slipping through the cracks once they ran away or went AWOL from care. And then they were rerouted, like I said before, into the JJ system for truancy, for status offenses. And they were trafficked in between because they were completely vulnerable. So Connecticut came to this problem and came to really accentuating the need for the solution by paying attention to the runaway and missing population. Like I said, many of them identify as LGBTQ. So thank you for your question. I'm just going to sum things up. Thank you all for coming today. And we've heard today from our wonderful panelists about the need for a child welfare response nationally. These are our kids. They are in the child welfare system. They are in the foster care system, and they are being trafficked and exploited within our states, in our towns, just down the street. And there is a need for better training, for better systems integration, for better identification and assessment, and most of all, for services and for a place for these children to go. Right now, they have nowhere to go. And so I just really want to thank all of the panelists for sharing some ways that we can help these kids, and for Karen Bass's leadership in this matter, and for coming up with a piece of legislation that could go a long way in helping these children. And a couple of plugs. The video of this briefing will be on fosteryouthcaucus.org. You can find it there soon. And we want to encourage you to like and follow Representative Karen Bass on Facebook and Twitter, as well as all of the fantastic organizations represented here today. And you can also find more information at Victims' Rights Caucus website, which is brc.po.house.gov. And we'll be hanging out if anyone has any further questions. Thank you all.